What if Harry was raised by Professor McGonagall? What if she couldn't stand to watch him be treated so poorly by the Dursleys? Let's explore this magical Harry Potter what if. Are you sure, Albus? McGonagall questioned as they approached the doorsteps of the Muggle home. I've watched them all day. They are the worst sort of Muggles. They are the only family he has left. Dumbledore carefully set the baby down on the front step, a letter placed on the blanket. Minerva still wondered if they were making the correct decision, allowing the boy to grow up away from magic and with Muggles that would likely despise him. Though she held her tongue. Albus Dumbledore always had his reasons, and he was more often than not correct. However, McGonagall continued to watch the family, keeping tabs on how they were treating the boy, with the plans to ensure that he grew up safely. The next morning, when Vernon Dursley opened the door to head to work, he let out a yelp as he spotted the baby on his doorstep, lying right where his morning paper should be. Petunia Dursley joined him at the door to see what the commotion was about. She recognized the boy immediately. Though she spent very little time with her sister since she went away to Hogwarts, she knew what her son had looked like from pictures sent to her in the post. Awful images that moved on their own. Petunia took Harry into her arms while Vernon read aloud the note that was left with him. A horrible story about how Lily and James Potter were murdered the night before by a dark wizard, and that Harry had no other family to care for him. Take the boy inside, Vernon spoke quickly, starting towards his car. We'll discuss what to do over dinner. The two pondered their options, debating whether to raise Harry along with their own son Dudley, or send him off elsewhere. They knew that keeping the boy would lead to other issues further down the road. Knowing what James and Lily were, there was no way that he wasn't the same. Taking Harry into their home, McGonagall was pleased when Petunia was caring for Harry as if he were her own. Each time he cried, she would soothe him back to sleep. Harry and his cousin were given near equal treatment. Of course, Petunia and Vernon spoiled Dudley far more than their nephew. Things slowly began to change when Harry began walking. Petunia would leave Harry in his crib all day to avoid him getting into things. He was still fed and given a few toys, but Dudley was allowed to roam about the house freely. It didn't matter if he broke things or tore things off the shelves. Petunia happily followed him around while she tried to keep the house tidy for Vernon's return. Once he was 4, and the boys were old enough to understand Petunia more, Harry was forced to help clean up the house while Dudley continued to destroy it. The space under the stairs, which once was the timeout area for Harry, became his bedroom so Dudley could have more space for all of his toys. McGonagall couldn't bear to watch anymore when Petunia began to use the cupboard under the stairs as a means to keep Harry out of the way. When she needed to get cleaning done or was having guests over, she would lock the cupboard and leave the toddler in the small room with only a baby monitor for her to know if he was all right or not. But Harry had a very stern warning not to call for her unless he was hurt. Harry was so young, he couldn't understand why he was always in trouble or why his aunt kept him out of sight so often. Late one night, after Petunia had put Dudley to bed and she and her husband were winding down in their own room, McGonagall let herself into the home. She wasted no time, opening the door to the small room beneath the stairs and pulling the boy into her arms. There, little one, she spoke more to herself, as the toddler was still fast asleep. I will make sure you grow up happy and loved. She packed up the few bits of clothing and toys that belonged to Harry and returned to Hogwarts. Since the untimely death of her husband, she had remained at Hogwarts, even during the holidays. McGonagall knew it would be tricky to raise a child in the school, and with her teaching duties taking up so much of her time, but she would find a way to manage. For Harry's sake. It took a few days for Harry to warm up to the woman, of course having not seen her before and believing her to be a stranger. But McGonagall was able to keep him calm with stories of his parents, of the adventures that James would go on with his friends, and how smart Lily was. McGonagall provided him with plenty of toys and clothes, enough that it seemed to overfill her living quarters and her stuff was hardly visible anymore. She showed him magic to keep him entertained and told him of how one day he would be able to do magic of his own. The most difficult part was keeping an eye on him while she taught her classes. She was finally able to use a portrait in her room to watch over the boy while she taught, and should anything happen, he would find her in the classroom and inform her to return to her room. The portrait was able to convey the same stories as McGonagall and would discourage him from doing anything that would hurt him. After about a week of balancing her new life, Dumbledore approached the professor after one of her classes. "You know why we left him with that family, Minerva. You have to return the boy." "And just leave that boy to suffer?" "I think not," McGonagall argued. "They were barely feeding the boy. He was spending most of his day locked in a room smaller than a broom cupboard. The protection spell only works as long as he lives with a blood relative. He doesn't need protection. You know who is dead. Here he can be happy and cared for, and we can help him control his magic. Those muggles will force him to suppress it. You won't change my mind on this, Albus." As Harry grew a bit older, he would sit in on classes as McGonagall taught, and during the holidays when most students had returned home, he had nearly free range throughout the castle. He grew more and more eager to start his own time at school, to be in classes other than Transfiguration. His 11th birthday was drawing closer, and Harry began to wonder how McGonagall ended up being the one to raise him. She had told him many stories of his parents, but not what had happened to them. The few times he asked, she would simply say that she would explain everything when he was old enough to understand. Harry waited impatiently for McGonagall to return to the room. It was his 11th birthday, and that meant that she would soon take him to get his school supplies, and it was only a matter of time before he would begin his classes. "Happy birthday, my little one." McGonagall came into the room, a large smile on her face. "I have a surprise for you, but first," she held out a small envelope. "My letter." Harry gasped, quickly taking the parchment from her hand. "Dear Mr. Potter, we are pleased to announce that you've been accepted at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry." He couldn't finish reading the letter aloud, quickly looking to his caretaker. "When can we go to Diagon Alley?" "We'll go first thing tomorrow, but now for your surprise." She motioned him to follow her into the other room. Sitting atop the armchair next to the fireplace sat a white owl with black spots along its front. "Is that for me?" Harry exclaimed. "Of course, everyone is allowed to come to Hogwarts with a pet." "Thank you, thank you, thank you." He wrapped his arms around her. "You'll have to pick a name for her." She patted the top of his head lightly. "Now let's get some dinner. We have a big day tomorrow." Harry woke up at first light, ready to get down to Diagon Alley and get his school supplies. He knew that he had another month before school started, but he could have a wand, textbooks of his own. Sure, he had read most of them from the library, but now he could have his own copy, and he was that much closer to seeing a class other than Transfiguration. He could barely sit still as he and Minerva ate their breakfast. Between bites, he asked if they could stop at extra shops, the ice cream parlor, and maybe even the Quidditch shop. When they arrived at Diagon Alley via the Flu Network, the first stop was to Gringotts Bank. Harry had money saved away from his parents after their death. There, they ran into the gamekeeper of the school, Hagrid. He was running an errand for Professor Dumbledore, something that McGonagall seemed to know about as they didn't talk of many details. Then came his robes. While Harry was getting fitted for his robes, there was another boy there, also getting fitted. He spent the whole time complaining that he couldn't get the house-specific robes yet because he hadn't been sorted, even though his entire family had been in Slytherin for ages. Harry tried to avoid talking to him. As they went from shop to shop, Harry was able to collect the rest of his school supplies: a cauldron, his textbooks, a telescope, a set of scales and files. The only thing that was left was his wand. It took a couple tries, but he ended up leaving with a holly wand, 11 inches long, a phoenix feather core, and was described as nice and supple by Mr. Ollivander. The wand maker had also mentioned the wand having a brother before McGonagall rushed him out. "There are a couple things we should discuss before the term begins, Harry." McGonagall sounded more serious as she and the boy took a seat in the ice cream parlor. "Is something wrong? You must understand that you will not receive any special treatment from me or the other professors. You are still going to have to work hard with your classes and follow the rules." "I understand. You also need to know that there will be some coursework in your history class that I should tell you beforehand." I've always told you that I would explain this when you're older. You and your parents are a bit famous. McGonagall went on to explain what happened the night of his parents' murder and the dark wizard responsible for the event. She also explained the reasons on how she came to be the one to care for him. The other students likely know who you are. No one has survived the killing curse before. Harry grew more curious about what had happened during the Wizarding War to cause a dark wizard to come after his parents. Professor McGonagall had always talked about how they were as students and with their friends, but that had been the first he learned of what happened to them. He was grateful that McGonagall had taken him in instead of leaving him to the Dursleys, a family that he had no memory of. He tried to think of a way to show the professor how much he appreciated her. She had taught him everything he knew and taken care of him for years when she had no obligation to do so. The first day of school had arrived, and the Hogwarts Express was moments from pulling into the station. Harry didn't have to sit through the long train ride, as he was living at the castle. But McGonagall had him join the students on the platform so he could ride the boats over with the other first years. He ended up in a boat with a red-headed boy, a girl with bushy brown hair, and a blonde boy. The redhead was quick to introduce himself, starting a chain reaction with the other students. Ron Weasley, Hermione Granger, and Neville Longbottom. All three stopped and stared at Harry when he spoke his name, amazed that it was really him. As they walked up the steps of the castle, Harry tried to make small talk, asking Ron how his train ride was. The boy explained he spent the train ride alone, that the only compartment that had space was empty. Harry felt bad for Ron, knowing that it was nearly an 8-hour train ride that he had just spent alone. He decided that if he and Ron were placed in the same house, that he would try to be friends with him. Luckily enough for both of them, Harry and Ron were sorted into Gryffindor. They spent their time during the welcome feast getting to know one another and talking about what classes they were excited for. They talked about their favorite Quidditch teams and how they both loved wizard's chess. Ron talked all about how big his family was, pointing out all of the brothers that he had sitting a few tables down, and the 3 other siblings that weren't currently at school. When Ron asked about Harry's family, he of course knew that his parents were dead. Harry didn't want Ron to think that he would be favored by McGonagall, so he said that he was living with his aunt. Which wasn't that far of a stretch. He considered McGonagall more as family than the aunt and uncle he couldn't remember. As they started their classes, Ron and Harry put a lot of focus into their studies. Harry took notes in each class and helped Ron through things that he didn't understand. In charms, they had jumped right into levitation, and Ron's pronunciation was a tad bit off. In transfiguration, McGonagall showed the class a few examples of the type of magic and discussed what they would be learning for the term. History of magic was dull, though that was mostly due to the teacher, a ghost who droned on for what felt like hours. The class he quickly discovered he would like the least would be potions. Professor Snape accused him of not paying attention and asked him a series of questions, all of which he knew the answer to, thanks to his access to the library during the summers. What would I get if I added a powder root of asphodel to an infusion of wormwood? The answer was a sleeping potion. Where would find me a bezoar? The stomach of a goat. And what is the difference between monkshood and wolfsbane? They are the same thing. Afterwards, Snape sarcastically congratulated Harry for not letting the fame get to his head. Draco Malfoy, a Slytherin, seemed to have taken a dislike to Harry and Ron, though Harry couldn't figure out why, as the two hadn't talked much. The Slytherin boy accused him of being a know-it-all at the end of potions class. Malfoy seemed to look for any reason to one-up Harry, anything to try to show off that he knew more and was better than the boy who lived. Though he would make fun of anyone that he could put down, even his friends. Gryffindors and Slytherins had their flying class together, and Draco was using any opportunity to talk about how he's been flying for ages and that he didn't need this class. McGonagall had taught him to fly too. She was a big fan of Quidditch, but Harry didn't see the point in boasting about this. Most had flown a little bit growing up. Neville Longbottom had never touched a broomstick and was a nervous wreck, and Hermione Granger was chewing her nails. The idea of being able to fall off a broomstick making her anxious, which Neville did exactly that. Madam Hooch had only wanted them to hover in place and then land back on the ground, but he had lost control of the broom almost immediately. After zooming around the courtyard for a bit, Neville fell from his broom and landed on the ground with a hard thump. Malfoy and his friends thought that this was the highlight of their day. The moment Madam Hooch left to take Neville to the hospital wing, they started laughing as if someone had just told the best jokes. "Look at this! It's that stupid thing his grandmother sent him." "Give it here, Malfoy," Harry said quietly. "No, I think I'll put it somewhere for Longbottom to find. Up a tree, maybe? Come on, just give it here. He's already embarrassed. There's no reason to make it worse." Malfoy ignored Harry's request, jumping on his broom and flying high above the courtyard. "Come and get it, Potter, or maybe you're not as good as you say you are." Harry shook his head lightly. He hadn't talked once about how well he could fly, though McGonagall was very excited for him to be old enough to join the Quidditch team. "Scared, Potter? Guess you can't be good at everything." Harry tried to ignore his taunting. "I guess Longbottom will find this on top of the school. It will only take him until he graduates." Harry finally grabbed his broom, about to take off when Hermione warned against it. Madam Hooch had specifically told them to not move. Harry asked for the Remembrall again, moving towards Malfoy. However, the Slytherin waited until Potter got close to throw the ball. He launched it across the courtyard. Harry was able to quickly dive after it, snatching it from the air just a few feet from the ground before pulling up. And as if he had been flying for years, he gracefully jumped off his broom, pocketing the Remembrall. The other students began to tell him how great he had just been and how cool he was, but he wasn't listening. His heart sank as he saw Professor McGonagall standing at the edge of the courtyard. "Harry Potter!" she yelled. He knew he had done it now. He had been working so hard not to cause her any problems. Passing his broom to Ron, Harry crossed the courtyard to the professor. He could see Malfoy's smug face as he did. "What were you thinking? You could have broken your neck. Explain yourself." "I'm sorry. Malfoy took something of Neville's. I was just trying to get it back. I wasn't trying to cause any problems. Follow me." She led him through the castle until they stopped outside of the Charms classroom. This left Harry more confused than worried. He thought he was in trouble, but what would they be doing here? "Professor Flitwick, could I borrow wood for a moment, please?" An older student soon stepped out of the room, and McGonagall quickly led them into the empty room next door. "Harry Potter, this is Oliver Wood. Wood, I have found you a seeker." "Are you serious, Professor?" "Yes, he's had little practice on a broom, but he just caught this ball from a 50-foot dive. I've never seen anything like it." Harry pulled the Remembrall from his pocket. "I don't think even Charlie Weasley could have pulled that off." "Ever seen a game of Quidditch, Potter?" "Not really. We'll have to get him a good broom, Professor." "I shall talk to Dumbledore about it. We may be able to take the cup this year. Potter, I want to hear that you're practicing hard. Otherwise, we'll have to rediscuss you breaking rules in class. Be proud. Your father was quite the Quidditch player, too." Malfoy spent the rest of the day assuming that Harry was in trouble and that he would be on his way home. Harry kept quiet, not wanting to get himself in any more problems, though Ron was allowing Malfoy's taunts to get under his skin. After dinner, after the Slytherin made a passing comment about the Weasley family, Ron was prepared to fight Malfoy. The two ended up challenging each other to a duel. They would meet at midnight in the trophy room. Harry was Ron's second, and Crabbe was Malfoy's. Harry hadn't said anything to Malfoy the entire conversation. He was just trying to calm Ron down, and now he would have to try to talk him out of sneaking out of the common room. It was dark as the two crept down the stairs. The only things moving about the castle this late were the ghosts. "This isn't a good idea, Ron. We can't duel, and we really shouldn't be sneaking out this late. We'll get Gryffindor into trouble. We can't just let Malfoy get away with this. We'll be quick, and we won't get caught. Fred and George sneak out all the time." After too long of following Ron as he aimlessly wandered through the castle, Harry spoke up again. "Ron, this isn't the way to the trophy room. We should just go back to the portrait. Let's try through here. This is the corridor that Dumbledore said was forbidden. Who's there? Ron and Harry froze at the sound of the voice. Filch, run! The two rushed down the hallway. There was a single door at the end, locked, as no one was supposed to be going inside. Ron began to panic, but Harry ignored him. Pulling his wand from his pocket, he was able to use the unlocking charm to open the door. Slamming the door shut, Ron let out a sigh of relief. How did you know that? It's in the textbook, Ron. Do you hear Filch? Trying to listen through the door, there was a sound that caught their attention. However, it came from behind them. It sounded like a dog waking from a nap. And it would be easy to say that was what the Gryffindors saw when they turned around. Though the dog filled the entire room, standing as tall as the ceiling, and more importantly, it had 3 heads. Go! Harry shouted, forcing the door back open. Growling and barking, the dog lurched at them, attempting to shove one of the heads through the doorway back out into the hallway. Thankfully, the dog could not fit its head through. Otherwise, Harry and Ron never would have been able to shut the door again. Can we please go back to the common room now? Yeah, that sounds like a good idea. The next morning, Harry received a letter with the morning mail. It was a small note from Professor McGonagall, stating that she needed to see him in her office before his first class. Harry rushed to finish his breakfast before excusing himself and making his way to her classroom. The door was open, as was the door to her office. He knocked on the wood lightly as he took a couple steps inside. There you are. McGonagall had a huge smile on her face, something he didn't see often. I've talked to Dumbledore and we've gotten you a broom so you can join the Quidditch team. I've already had it sent up to your room. I don't want you showing it off to your classmates. First years are not supposed to have one, understand? Yes, of course. Thank you. The other teachers have told me how focused you are and that you're even helping Mr. Weasley with some of his work. Yes, Ron has become a really good friend. Excellent. Can I ask you something? I may have accidentally gone into the corridor on the 3rd floor. I got myself turned around and I saw the dog. Are you hurt? What were you thinking? That corridor is out of bounds. It was an accident, but I saw the trap door. I was wondering if it had anything to do with the Gringotts break-in. It was the same day that Hagrid was running an errand for Professor Dumbledore. I will advise you not to worry about this further. What that dog is doing in the school is not your concern, and I expect you not to be mentioning it to anyone else. For your safety. Of course I'm sorry. Harry put his head down and focused on his schoolwork after that. He had seen McGonagall twice now for things he shouldn't have been doing, and even though he volunteered when he found the dog and it wasn't entirely what happened, it didn't feel good. He hated the idea that he might be disappointing her. This worked until Halloween. Coming back inside from his flying lesson, Harry had seen Professor Quirrell heading down to the dungeons, looking around to see if anyone had seen him before going down the stairs. Harry didn't think anything of it until he came charging into the Great Hall. Dinner was nearly over, and Quirrell had missed most of it. He threw open the main doors and came running inside, crossing the entire hall in a sprint. He nearly collapsed against the teacher's table. Troll, in the dungeon. He slumped to the floor, out in a second. Dumbledore quickly took charge of the room before things got too out of control, declaring that prefects would lead everyone back to their common rooms, while the teachers would follow him to the dungeons. Harry thought it was a bit suspicious that Quirrell had missed all of dinner, and a troll had managed to find its way into the castle during that time. What was even more suspicious was that as he followed the rest of the Gryffindors back to his dormitory, he saw Professor Snape rush into the 3rd floor corridor. And just a moment later, Quirrell was trying to sneak into the hall as well, though he was much more worried about who could potentially see him. Looking across the staircase, he caught Harry's stare. Harry quickly looked away, hoping that the professor didn't notice. Once back in their rooms, Harry told Ron what he saw. Ron immediately accused Snape of trying to steal whatever the dog was protecting. But Harry wasn't so sure. He was more suspicious of Quirrell. The next morning only confirmed to him that Snape wasn't the one to worry about. As he entered the potions classroom, he could hear Snape in his office. He was talking to someone, but he couldn't see who without letting either of them know that he was standing there. "Stupid dog, how are you supposed to watch 3 heads at once? That blasted groundskeeper won't tell me how to get past it." Harry decided that he would talk to Hagrid about the dog. He knew that McGonagall had told him to drop it, but now that he had seen Quirrell trying to sneak into the corridor, he couldn't get the thought out of his mind. "Harry?" Hagrid cheered as he allowed the boy into his hut. "What brings you by today?" "I was hoping I could ask you a couple of questions." "Of course, anything." "When we ran into you at Gringotts, when I was getting my school supplies, you said you were getting something for Professor Dumbledore." "I'm sorry, Harry, but that's top secret. I can't tell you that." "Is that what the 3-headed dog is protecting?" "How do you know about Fluffy?" "Fluffy? That's an odd name." "I named him that when I got him. He was much smaller then. I lent him to Dumbledore to protect the..." "Protect what, Hagrid? I think someone is trying to steal it." "That doesn't concern you, Harry. I promise that Professor Dumbledore has everything under control. What that dog is guarding is between him and Nicholas Flamel." Harry thought on the name Nicholas Flamel over the weekend. He knew he had heard the name before, but couldn't pinpoint where. He considered what Hagrid said, that Dumbledore knew what he was doing. If the thing Hagrid had taken from the vault was as important as he thought it was, if someone was willing to break into Gringotts for it, then there must be more things protecting it, not just a dog. Harry put himself back to his studies, and the name Nicholas Flamel began to slip from his mind. His first Quidditch game was coming up, and it was only a matter of time before the exam started up. The Quidditch game was a huge success. Harry had been able to catch the snitch, although it wasn't a traditional win. And a small hiccup in the match, Harry had lost control of his broom for a bit, which Ron swore that it was Snape trying to jinx his broom. In the end, Harry was able to catch the snitch, nearly falling from his broom and catching it in his mouth. Gryffindor won against Slytherin. Harry's next focus was his exams. He wanted to show McGonagall that he was taking his studies seriously and that he wasn't worrying about the 3-headed dog. When Christmas break finally rolled around and exams were done, McGonagall collected the names of the students who were staying at Hogwarts for the holiday. Malfoy had finally found an excusable insult to use against Harry. He had tried to make fun of him for losing control of his broom, but everyone had been impressed that Harry had been able to stay on. He then tried to make fun of his grades, but Harry had passed all of his tests. Malfoy had finally landed on Harry not having a family to go visit, that his parents were dead, which was true. But Malfoy didn't know that the only few people that he would want to spend the holiday with were also staying at Hogwarts. McGonagall wouldn't leave, not while there were students staying at the school. And Ron and his brothers would be staying at the school as well. Ron said that his parents would be going to Romania to visit his older brother. Harry ended up spending Christmas Eve with McGonagall. She planned it so that he could open his presents with his friends the next morning. He resisted the urge to ask her about Nicholas Flamel, knowing that it would just lead to a conversation of things that Harry shouldn't be involved in. But he also wondered if she should know that Quirrell was trying to get past the dog. Harry woke the next morning with Ron shouting his name. It was Christmas morning, and Ron was already downstairs. Harry had gotten a couple of treats from McGonagall, all of them labels as being from his aunt, as well as a sweater from Mrs. Weasley. The last package was an odd piece of fabric, a cloak. Only when Harry put it on, his body disappeared. An invisibility cloak, a rare magical item. It came with a note stating that the cloak had previously belonged to his father and should be returned to Harry. Harry tucked the cloak away in his bedroom and changed into the jumper from Mrs. Weasley. He now matched the brothers. Ron's was maroon, even though he stated that he hated the color. Fred and George had navy blue, and Percy begrudgingly wore a dark green one. He had no intention of wearing the sweater until Fred and George had forced it on him. They spent the day relaxing and having family fun. It was the closest Harry had ever felt to having siblings. First was some time in the Great Hall, enjoying an enormous feast, wizard crackers, and time talking. Harry had managed to get a chess set out of one of the crackers and was looking forward to playing with Ron later. After snowball fights outside, Warming themselves by the fireplace in the common room, and a few rounds of wizard's chess, it was time to call it a night. Slowly, the Weasleys and Harry gathered their things and returned to their rooms. Harry eyed his cloak again, realizing that while most students were away for the break, it would be a safe time to test it out. He'd be less likely to run into someone this way. Harry had ignored the cloak for most of the break, but with students returning tomorrow, it was his last chance to use it so easily. He waited for Ron to go to sleep before taking the cloak and sneaking out of the common room. Harry was only a few steps down the stairs, and he realized that he could go anywhere. The whole school was available for him to search and wander. No one would see him, and he couldn't get in trouble. Which made him also think of the three-headed dog. If he could figure a way to distract the dog, he could sneak down the trapdoor and see what it was that Quirrell wanted so badly. As he wandered the school, he had a near run-in with Filch, causing Harry to slip into an empty classroom in order to hide. However, the classroom wasn't empty. Standing tall in the center of the room is a mirror. The frame was an odd shape with 3 points across the top, and the mirror was big enough to reflect the entire classroom. More importantly, there was someone standing in front of the mirror. Professor Quirrell stood in front of it, observing himself carefully. "We're nearly there, Master. This is taking far too long. Once I learn how to get rid of that dog, we will be able to get through the rest of the chambers. Finish this, we are running out of time." Harry hadn't any idea where the second voice was coming from, and at the moment he didn't care. He rushed out of the room and quickly took himself back to the common room. And just before he put himself to bed, he discovered the last piece of his puzzle. Ron had left his chocolate frog cards out on the side table. Dumbledore's card had been on top, and the card read about the professor's work with Nicholas Flamel, the famous alchemist. That was when Harry remembered one of the books he read over the summer. Nicholas Flamel was the creator of the Sorcerer's Stone, which could produce the elixir of life, making someone immortal. Harry knew now that he had to speak to McGonagall. He had gotten most of the pieces together, and with what he had just seen, she would have to believe him. Harry woke up early, unable to keep himself in bed any longer. He rushed down to McGonagall's office, thankful to see that she was already awake and working. "Professor, I have something important to talk to you about." "Of course. I know you said not to worry about it, and I really tried, but something's happened. I think Professor Quirrell is trying to steal the Sorcerer's Stone." "How on earth do you know about the stone?" "On Halloween, on my way to dinner, I saw Professor Quirrell sneaking down to the dungeons. And then again, when we were sent to our dormitories, he was sneaking into the third-floor corridor." "That's enough. But then, yesterday, I accidentally found the room with the mirror in it. Quirrell was there, talking to an invisible person." "The Mirror of Erised?" "He called this other person Master, and they were talking about getting past the dog and through the other chambers. There wasn't anyone else in the room, though." "That is quite enough. I will talk to Dumbledore about this, but I forbid you from looking into this anymore. You will not go near the third floor, and you will not go near that mirror again. Am I clear?" "Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry." Unfortunately for Harry, he hadn't realized that Professor Quirrell had been just outside the classroom, and he had heard everything. At breakfast, the start of the new term, the room was full of students, and the voices of the children carried through the room. Harry was just about to start eating his food when his glass of pumpkin juice exploded. The juice splashed everywhere, the nearby food, Harry and Ron, as well as the teacher that had been walking behind them. It was an unusually large amount of liquid that had splashed out in every direction, more than the cup should have been capable of holding. "Potter!" Snape snapped, trying to brush the liquid from his robes. "That's detention." Harry tried to argue that he hadn't done anything, but the professor didn't listen, rushing off towards the teacher's table. Harry spent the whole day dreading his detention, assuming that he would be stuck with Snape for a couple of hours after dinner. But his detention was instead with Hagrid, and it certainly wasn't going to be a traditional detention. Hagrid was taking him into the Forbidden Forest in search of something that was killing the unicorns. He explained that he had found one dead the previous week and how another one was out here hurt, as he kept finding the silver blood throughout the forest. As they began their search through the forest, it didn't take long for Harry to get himself turned around and separated from Hagrid. He could see the castle lights through the tree and figured that it would be the best path to head back towards the school. It was a good idea until he came across a dead unicorn. Leaning over the unicorn was a cloaked figure, and at the sound of Harry, immediately looked up and towards the student. "Harry Potter, we meet at last." Harry recognized the voice from the night with Quirrell, the Invisible Man. The figure stood and removed its hood. Quirrell now stood in front of him, only this time, he didn't have his turban on. "Professor, I was hoping to run into you tonight. Let me speak to him." "Master, you are not strong enough." "I have enough strength for this." Quirrell turned around, revealing a face on the back of his head. This caused Harry to stagger back. "Harry Potter, Voldemort? You must realize what I am after. Unicorn blood is enough for me to survive, but I cannot survive in a body of my own. With your help, we can find the Sorcerer's Stone. With it, we can live forever. With it, I can help you see your mother and father again. The troll was a distraction so you could sneak past the dog. Yes, and it would have worked had Snape not gotten there first. And my cup this morning. I needed to get you out here into the forest. Join me, Harry Potter, and we can be unstoppable. I've told McGonagall about you, Dumbledore knows. With you out of my way, they cannot stop me. Get him." Quirrell began moving towards Harry, and he tried to back away, only to trip over a branch. The professor seized his wrist, and in that moment, Harry felt a bolt of pain running through the scar on his forehead. He tried to wrench Quirrell's hand off of him. This time, he let out a cry of pain. At his touch, Quirrell ripped his hand away from the boy. His hand turned gray, and it began to crack, looking like stone. Quirrell screamed, having never seen anything like it. However, Voldemort did not care, and urged him after Harry once again. Harry could only guess that it was his touch that had done that to the professor. So, as Quirrell grew closer, he charged at him, shoving both of his hands onto the man's face. His screams grew louder as his face began to blister and crack in the same way that his hand had. Soon, his whole face looked to be crumbling. It was his last chance to take Quirrell out before he tried to kill Harry. He wrapped himself around the man, holding tight and ignoring the pain that seared through his forehead. One moment, Quirrell was struggling to break himself free. The next, everything stopped. Harry woke to the sound of someone rushing towards him. He was no longer in the forest. The dark tree branches had been replaced with the marbled ceiling of the hospital wing, and the hard ground beneath him was now the plush bed. "Oh, my boy." McGonagall took a seat at the edge of the bed. "Are you all right?" "I think so. What happened?" Dumbledore spoke next. "Hagrid found you in the forest with what was left of Professor Quirrell." "I killed him?" "No fault of your own, because he was playing host for Lord Voldemort, who could not touch you. Do you know why?" Harry shook his head. "It is because of your mother. She died to protect you. It left a mark, one that cannot be seen, but one that keeps you safe." "Does that mean Voldemort is gone?" "I'm afraid there are other ways that he can return. And because of this, we will be destroying the stone." "Nicholas Flamel, he'll die, won't he?" "Not to worry, Harry. He and his wife have enough elixir to set their affairs in order. And we were able to keep the stone safe thanks to you. I don't know how you were able to catch Quirrell talking to himself like that, but if you had not informed me of what you saw, he likely would have been able to sneak into the hidden chamber last night. Now rest. I think you've had enough excitement for one night. I'm sorry, Minerva." It had been the first time he had gotten to use her name since the start of term. "I was trying not to get involved." I know. Just rest up. We still have the rest of the year to get through. It should be far less eventful now. Harry's first year at Hogwarts ended rather smoothly compared to the first half. Thanks to his practice, Gryffindor won the Quidditch Cup. He was able to focus on his studies and pass all of his classes, even potions when it seemed like Snape was always trying to knock points off for something. And Gryffindor was awarded the House Cup at the farewell feast. That's our theory. Harry Potter's time at Hogwarts has many magical stories. Don't forget to like and subscribe to see what other magic we uncover.